Thank you, Tiziana. I'd been better for a while. All right. As I said, this week's Torah portion is just continuation of the basic theme of last week. Purification rituals for those who had incurred tzara'at as a result, according to tradition, of having spoken ill of other people, lashon hara. Once the month of Nisan begins, as again, last week we began on Shabbat, we already begin kind of introducing a certain sense of joy in the month, because it's a month of redemption. And so there's certain things that change a little bit in the synagogue, daily ritual, which if you're a regular attendee will note that for those synagogues that recite the Tachanun, the daily penitential prayers, those are omitted during the entire month of Nisan. Now, preparing for Pesach, we have to first understand what is chametz. The Torah says you can't have any chametz in your households, in your land, and on Pesach, and you're only allowed to eat matzot. And so before we can say let's get rid of chametz, we have to know what chametz is. The very popular definition is one you'll hear: chametz is bread. I want everybody to take into their minds and hearts and souls, it is not bread. Okay? How do I know it's not bread? Because the blessing we recite over bread is hamotzi lechem min haaretz. And at the Seder table, when we eat the matzah, we say two blessings. One of them is for the mitzvah of eating matzah at the Seder, and the other is hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the blessing we say over bread. The difference between matzah and other breads is that it doesn't rise. Chametz, and this is important to understand. The rabbis explain that the biblical command not to eat or even own any chametz on Pesach refers to any of the 5 basic grains of the ancient world: wheat, barley, oats, spelt, and rye. Those are generally assumed to be the 5 species of grains that were used by in the Middle East. Once they've been ground into flour and mixed with water and not completely baked, within 18 minutes, that is chametz. Okay? So a flat cracker can be chametz. You can have matzah that are chametz. Okay? So we have to first understand that the ban is a reference to specific grains that have been allowed to leaven. And the rabbis understood the period of time it takes for a grain to leaven is 18 minutes. Okay? So get it out of your head that bread is forbidden on Pesach. Put into your head, chametz is forbidden on Pesach, and chametz can be bread, it can be cake, it can be ketchup, it can be all kinds of things that have any of these grain products mixed in with them that have been allowed to rise or may have risen. Okay? So we're told that we have to remove all chametz from our homes. So we're going to talk about the issues of kashrut of Pesach. Then we'll get into preparing for Pesach, and next week we will go over the Haggadah for Passover of Pesach. Okay, so since the rabbi said that according to the Torah, the punishment for someone who has chametz on Pesach is karet, Karet is never really defined by the Torah. It means literally being cut off. It is considered to be the worst punishment possible. It's worse than a human punishment. It's worse than being executed by a human court. It's a divine punishment. For that reason, the laws of Passover start off as being strict, and as generations have gone by, have gotten stricter. So so what we do is, if we're going to have any of those grain products, those 5 products, 5 grains, they have to be made into matzah. Once upon a time, Jews did bake matzah during the Passover time, on Passover. Today, no one would do that. For fear that they might make a mistake. Now, how are matzahs prepared? Well, there's a very nice, let's go the old-fashioned way, the old-fashioned hand matzah. I had the privilege many years ago of being part of a group that were making matzot for Pesach. And what it was at this Hasidic shtibel, and we were there and had to have a large crew of people, as I'll explain as we go along. There was a former pizza oven that had been converted into a matzah oven lined with brick. And you knew that the oven was hot enough when they took a lulav that was left from Passover and threw it into the oven. And if it caught on fire immediately, the oven was hot enough. Okay, so a regular pizza oven's not hot enough. Understand that. Okay. So there would be flour. Now the flour, all flour really has to be made sure that it doesn't come in contact with water. Shmura flour, matzah shmura flour, they're a little even more stringent. They try to make sure that even in the field, there was no rain that hit the grains after they ripened. Okay? And so that's really the only difference between shmura matzah and other matzah, is how early they go on being extra careful about any water coming in contact. Okay. So there would be he had a steel mixing bowl. The requisite amount of flour, I don't know the exact dimensions, ingredients, you can look it up, I'm sure, somewhere. Flour is put into the bowl. And just before the water was poured into that flour, the timer was set, 18 minutes. The water goes in, timer starts. He mixes up the flour and the water, makes it into a dough. And then there are a whole bunch of people lined up in line. And he would take a little bit of that dough, in a ball of that dough, hands it to the first person in line. That person takes it, makes sure they handle it, and shouldn't be left not being handled at all. They go to the tables that are covered with paper, puts the dough on the paper, roll it out. If they have a roller, if they have a rolling pin, whatever it may be, then they're going to punch holes into it so that it makes, let's say, if any air starts to get in it, it escapes right away. Some have fancy rollers that have pins in them that gives you this nice polka dot complexion to the matzah. And as soon as you've got it ready, you run over to where the guy is at the oven, and he puts it in the oven. And people are constantly coming with that those doughs that have been taken care of. Hopefully all the flour and water has been used up. And then it's within a minute, I think, I don't remember exactly how long it took the matzah to actually bake. They would pull it right out of the oven and put more in. And then the bell would go off. And everybody stopped. Any matzot that were not baked by that point, toss them out. Anything that was left in the mixing bowl, got rid of it. Clean out the mixing bowl, scrape it clean, make sure it's all clean, nothing, no residue left whatsoever. And then you start over again. Right? As a matter of fact, I just recently learned that one of the major matzah factory plants is in Ukraine and goes through Odessa, in the port of Odessa. So there's going to be a problem this year with shmura matzah as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I shouldn't say the Ukraine. Funny how a little word like "the" can become a very political sensitive thing. The Ukrainians call it Ukraine. The Russians refer to it as the Ukraine. Okay. Now, if you want to have hand shmura matzah, you can buy hand shmura matzah for Passover. It's made all over the world. A lot comes in from Montreal here, it comes from Israel, it comes from Ukraine, throughout the world. You can also have what is called machine shmura matzah. And that the only difference is instead of people doing it, there's a machinery that does it. Right? And that's designed to roll out the matzahs, get them baked, get off the line after 18 minutes, so that follows through. There's really no real halachic difference between the hand shmura and the machine shmura, except the hand shmura usually looks burnt, and it's not uniform in size, and you pay extra money for it. Okay. If you have a dietary issue, there are spelt matzahs. There are oat matzahs for those who are like me, who can't, have to be gluten-free. And these are made from oats that are made sure they come in contact with nothing else, so that is available. So different things are out there.
Rabbi Berman?
Yes.
I was just wondering, because I know it's like commonly sold, but, and maybe I'm mistaken, but I think I've heard you're not supposed to have it. But what's the deal with egg matzahs?
Okay. All right. Matzah. Okay. Very good. All right. First, let's understand normal matzah, just flour and water, nothing else, no other ingredients. The question, the Talmud discusses this. If you use eggs for at least part or all of the liquid, does that speed up the process of leavening or slow it down? It's a difference of opinion. Some say that if you put eggs or oil into the mixture, it will become chametz faster. Others say it doesn't make a difference. So most traditionalists would say egg matzah is only for those who cannot eat regular matzah. If you're healthy and can eat regular matzah, make it through the 8 days of Pesach, just eating regular matzah, you should eat the regular matzah. See, I can eat only oat matzah, and I have some hand matzahs for the seders. I have machine matzah a little bit. The rest of the week I eat fake matzah. Okay, you don't say hamotzi on. Okay? So that's the issue with egg matzahs. And since we're talking about matzahs in general, I just want to point out there are different traditions. Some follow a tradition of from Purim until Passover, they will not eat matzah. So the matzah is new and fresh to them for Passover. Some only begin with Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Now, okay, so we have to have the matzahs. If you are going to want to bake something else, that's why sponge cakes and lots of eggs mixed with matzah meal are used on Pesach, because it doesn't rise. How can you have a cake that won't rise? So you have a lot of egg whites that are often used in recipes for making anything that you want to bake. There's a lot of stuff out there today. Most of it's not worth your money to go spend on it. get by, for 8 days, you can live without cereals and pancakes and all these other things they have basic things. But note that most of these items are made from matzah meal. So that's why they all taste pretty much the same, no matter what you do with it, depending how much extra flavoring you might add to it. Okay. All right. Now, so we've want to have other foods on Pesach. Hopefully we're going to have something else to eat besides matzah. And so any, regular meats, things that you can eat during the course of the year in the meat department are kosher for Passover, unless you've got some kind of strange mixture. If it's just plain meat, there's no problem. When it comes to vegetables, we come into the issue that drives a lot of people crazy. The Talmud discusses what grains can be used for matzah. Okay? And in order to be used for matzah, it has to be capable of becoming chametz. Right? It has to be able to do that. If you mix it, if you make a flour from anything, and it won't become chametz, what chametz really is that the yeast that's in the air gets onto whatever you're using to bake with. And the flour, good grief, I'm having have a birthday and you start to lose all your memories of everything in a while. The protein, the grain. I'll come back to it in a minute. All right. What happens is the yeast, the natural yeast in the air, comes onto it, and it begins to digest the flour. That's really what it is. It breaks it down. And as it breaks it down, it releases carbon dioxide. And that's what causes things to rise. Okay, the fermentation process. Okay, it's fermenting. If it can't ferment in a normal way, then the rabbi said it cannot be used for matzah, but it's not chametz. All right, still with me? Haven't lost anybody yet? All right. So the question came up. This is in the Talmud. What about rice? As far as the rabbis of the Talmud were concerned, rice can't go through that process of fermentation. Therefore, it only spoils. Therefore, there should be nothing wrong with having rice on Pesach. And indeed, I don't know if we have anybody here of Sephardic background, I forgot, but Sephardic Jews, many of them, eat rice on Passover. So what's the problem with us crazy Ashkenazim? Here's the problem with us crazy Ashkenazim. First of all, you can only, if you're eating rice, you have to make sure it's purely rice. So if you come from a good Sephardi family, one of the jobs of the older daughters, and you have lots of kids, so you got daughters, you got to put them to work, is they go through the bags of rice and make sure that no other grains got mixed in with it. Kernel by kernel, rice by rice, okay? I don't know if they write anything on it, but anyway, okay, so they make sure there's none there. Then there's no problem. However, the Jews of Europe, of France and Germany, and then moving eastward into Poland, etc., somewhere at some point in time got antsy. And they said that a number of items that the Talmud refers to as kitniot. Kitniot are legumes and beans. These are, and rice. These can be made into flour. They can be baked. They can make a bread or something like that, or pancakes, what have you, from these items. And it's not explained exactly why, but they forbade Jews in their communities from having kitniot on Passover. I think the problem may be, if you go to to one of these warehouse stores, right? And you got the bin here with the wheat, and you got a bin here with oats, and a bin here with barley, and a bin here with peanuts and whatever there, right? And you got a scoop, and you can scoop it out and put it in your bag, and you weigh it. You can buy the grains or the flour or whatever it is that you're buying in that kind of environment, right? So you ever notice that sometimes people aren't careful with the scoop and they put it in the other thing, or they're waiting for the scoop and the guy's busy with it, so they take one from the other bin and scoop out the flour that they wanted or the peanuts or whatever it may be? Well, now you're mixing. You're getting flour, regular flour, mixed in with your rice or your beans. So one of the problems may have been in the ancient, in medieval Europe, that's how they sold things, right? The farmer comes to town, he has his baskets full of whatever he's got it full of, or they went to the mill and the mill did the flour and they brought it there, whatever that may be. And you don't know if things are going to get mixed in with each other. So that's one problem. Another problem suggested, which I never have thought was a very good one, was that people might make a mistake. You can use this flour, therefore you can use that flour, and you end up using wheat flour. I don't understand that rationale, but that's another explanation given. But in any case, Ashkenazic Jewry, since somewhere in the Middle Ages, began the practice of not consuming kitniot on Passover. And now, then the question is, what constitutes kitniot? Well, beans, peas, lentils, all these things were ancient grains or legumes that our ancestors ate and everybody knew about. And that came under the general rubric of kitniot, and those were forbidden. However, there are some interesting issues. For example, American-derived maize, corn, nice corn cobs, right? Corn comes from the Americas. There was no corn in Europe. The confusion is sometimes because in German and therefore in Yiddish, the word corn means grain, and people make a mistake from that, okay? But there was no corn in Europe. However, corn very much was used as a kind of a flour by North American natives. And certainly you can see how there could be a problem with that. So that became easily one of the things that are adopted and say it was forbidden as kitniot. Okay. But peanuts. Peanuts were widely accepted by many, because the problem with peanuts was because it says P-E-A. And people thought they were like other legumes. And so they forbade using peanuts. A famous, important Orthodox rabbi of the 20th century, Moshe Feinstein, gave a rule that's really not followed by most of the traditional world, was only those items that were known and used when this ban on kitniot came into being would be banned on Passover. If they were not known in the 13th century, the 14th century in Europe, there's no reason really to ban them. But as I said, that went by the wayside. And even things that used to be allowed became forbidden. Soybeans are an example of something that was not available as well. The difference is we're not allowed to own or eat or have any benefit from chametz on Passover. We can own and have benefit from kitniot. Ashkenazic Jews don't eat it, but one important area where this comes into play for us animal lovers is since we can't feed our dogs food that has wheat grain in it, or any of the 5 grains, we can give our dogs grain foods that have rice or may have corn or soybeans, whatever, as part of the ingredients of that food. Because we're allowed to have benefit from it, even if we can't own it or eat it. Also, we're much more lenient, and if there's concerns about mixtures that take place when it comes to kitniot, because kitniot is a second level, and therefore the rule was that you could be lenient in many cases. Now, one of the great things today, which also becomes a big problem for those of us who follow the tradition of not eating kitniot, is that when I was a kid, 50, over 60 years ago, if you went to the grocery store and you wanted to find stuff for Passover, whatever was there, and it came from New York, New Jersey, wherever, United States, most likely somewhere. And if it had a kosher for Passover labeling, we'll come back to labeling in a bit, you didn't have to worry about it. Everybody, Ashkenazi Jews knew what the law was, etc. Now, at the same time, if you went to Israel, especially today, but even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the majority of observant Jews are not Ashkenazi. They are Sephardim. And Sephardim eat kitniot. So a lot of products in Israel have kitniot. Sometimes most of the time these days, they are labeled for those who eat kitniot. Sometimes it's only in Hebrew, which can be a problem. It says lochei kitniot. But now we import a lot of goods, prepared foods, what have you, from Israel. And they're on the shelves in the grocery stores with all the kosher for Passover items. And now you have to be careful if you're going to follow the rules that ban kitniot on Pesach, because a lot of these prepared items will be containing kitniot. Now, it was a couple of years, I think it's a couple of years now already. There are some voices in the conservative movement. I know in Israel it took place, and some said, and some here said that the issue of Passover and difficulties observing Passover with a ban on kitniot was too much, and so they wanted to be lenient to allow the use of kitniot. Again, as I always say, suggest to you, you speak with your sponsoring rabbi what their position is on eating kitniot. I will tell you, in the Orthodox world, kitniot are not consumed. Ashkenazi Orthodox world. Okay. Now, if somebody is ill, or somebody has special issues, like I've often had this problem, Rabbi, my son, my daughter has become a vegetarian. And I need something for them to eat, some kind of protein for them to eat. Can they eat kitniot? And so my answer is yes, if that's the reality. But you have to make sure it's separate from everything else and is prepared in its own utensils and doesn't get mixed up with everything else. Or people have other reasons that they may need to have these items that contain kitniot, then they may do so, but they try to keep it separate from anything else. Right? Now, as I alluded to, a lot of prepared foods may have flour in them. So, sometimes I say may contain wheat. During the year, maybe we're not so careful about that because we're not so worried about it, but on Pesach, we would be. And sometimes, not that they may contain, but they do have. For example, soy sauce. Soy sauce is made, part of the ingredients of soy sauce is wheat. Okay? That's why I have to have gluten-free soy sauce. So you can't consume that on Pesach according to Jewish tradition. So any item that is prepared undergoes processing, has to have a hechsher, has to be noted that is kosher for Passover, for the observant Jew. Because without that item being checked by the proper kosher authorities, you don't know if any kind of admixture of chametz got into it. It may even be one of the ingredients. Today, in some ways, that's less of a problem because they want the manufacturers want you to know. They don't want to have problems with people who have wheat intolerance, what have you. But it could be oats, it could be other things as well. So any prepared foods need to be properly certified. Now, what about things such as milk? There was a time when milk was an issue. First of all, some Jews didn't trust the milkman to make sure it was only pure cow's milk that was in the bottle. We talked about this a long time ago when we talked about kosher in general. And so a lot of authorities permitted milk today because they're more worried about the government than they're worried about a rabbi getting them in trouble. But some are very stringent for Passover. But al-pi din, really according to very clear, strictest clear law, if you buy milk before Passover begins, if there might be some, which is almost impossible today, chametz that got mixed in with that milk, it's more than nullified. So we buy milk, or often we buy chalav Yisrael also. But anyway, we've often bought milk before Passover so that we had it unopened when Passover came, and that was available. When I was the rabbi in El Paso, Texas, there was a dairy owned by one of my congregants, and the rabbi of the synagogue, which I was at that time, his job was to go to that dairy early in the morning before Passover, supervise a run of milk, and they would have a little, with my seal, not a seal, but they put on the milk, kosher for Passover, under my certification. It was no different from the milk that came out 10 minutes earlier or that came out 10 minutes later, except I was there and gave my gushpanka, my seal of approval. Okay. Now, when it comes to cheese and it comes to butter, there are a lot of other issues that may come in, and especially when it comes to margarine, because margarine is often made from kitniot. Those we all generally say have to have rabbinic supervision for Passover. Now, it is true, and it still could be true today, that there's a lot of shenanigans that take place. I don't doubt that. There used to be these horror stories that somebody would go to the grocery store and they would look for the sour cream for Passover. They couldn't find it. He says, oh, wait a minute. Goes in the back room, comes back with the label. He puts it on the sour cream that was in the front of the store. It now says kosher for Passover, and everybody was happy. All right. But today, usually that is already not a added tab. It's part of the makeup of the packaging. So somebody can't just add it to the carton of milk or just add it to the container of butter, what have you. So cutting to the chase, anything that is manufactured, goes through processing, must be labeled kosher for Passover. Wines are usually labeled kosher for Passover. I've never really come across a wine that wasn't kosher for Passover. It was kosher wine, it was kosher for Passover. I don't know how you would make it non-kosher for Passover, but be that as it may, most of the time the wines all have OUP or whatever their hexture is, things kosher for Passover.
I think
Fruits,
some of the ice wines are the kosher ice wines are not kosher for Passover because the heating, the mavushal process can mess up the sugars.
well, I don't know why that would
But
make
I
a
don't know.
difference. I don't know whether that would make a difference.
I just
Uh,
noticed that on some of them, like the special ones, it
well,
has the like.
well, we have one that's produced here in Ontario. I haven't bought any for. I'm not big on sweet wine like that, but I have to take a look and see. But you see, the fact of the matter is, we know that the same fermentation process that takes place in flour takes place in wine. We actually know that's going on. All right. And wine, of course, sits a lot longer than 18 minutes. And indeed, the alcohol comes from the fermentation process. All right. But that, if it's just grapes and it's just natural yeast, that should not be a problem. If the yeast comes from some source, then it might be, because a lot of yeast comes from a byproduct of beer production. And there are those who want to say that therefore makes that yeast not kosher for Passover. So I don't know, Corey. I will have to do some research if I get a chance to. I researched your other question the other day, and I wasn't as successful as I would have liked to have been on the what was it? Your making some, was it? I don't know, have something to do with a blessing. Anyway, I think I answered it. I have to go back and see. All right, but grain alcohol, all of those things, of course, are chametz. You know, Scotch, rye, all those are produced from grains that have to be kosher for Passover, and they've been gone through the fermentation process, and therefore they're not kosher for Passover. There are some kosher for Passover drinks. If you need something, I heartily do not recommend Slivovitz. If you need to clean the paint off of your wall, you can use Slivovitz. It's a plum brandy or something like that. It's not to my taste, but it's very popular in Eastern Europe in general, and other liqueurs and things like that are out there made for Passover. And like I said, there are lots of things that are made today for Passover. People can't do without X, Y, and Z for Passover. It becomes crazy. Don't go out of your mind trying to buy special for Passover items, because most of the time they taste bad. And also be careful to look and see a lot of, I'll be honest with you, a lot of brands, the term used in certain circles, Hamish brands, not the general, say Heinz ketchup. All right, let's say Heinz ketchup, for example. Heinz ketchup may have a run that you can find that's kosher for Passover. And that probably will not cost you much different from the regular Heinz ketchup that you would buy at that time of year. You go down to the kosher aisle and you'll find Gold Star or whatever ketchup for Passover, and they will charge you $1, $2, 50% more than what the other one cost. So if you can find the regular without spending extra money on it, and it's kosher for Passover, my advice is buy it, because people make a lot of money in a way that I don't think is really fair. But you do have, like I say, and then there are all kinds of questions that come up. For example, recently, quinoa was discovered for the North American market. Quinoa is not a grain. It's not a legume. It's perfectly fine for Passover. You just have to make sure that it's not mixed with anything else. But most of the time, it shouldn't be an issue. And some wanted to forbid it because anytime something comes along they didn't know about, they want to forbid it. There was a desire to forbid potatoes back when, because potatoes weren't known in Europe, and you can use potatoes for everything. So no, that one fell by the wayside. Everybody accepts potatoes. People eat potatoes. If you have nothing else to eat, you eat potatoes. But check with your rabbi. Their core has their book, the local kosher agency. They're overly stringent. They, for example, do not permit quinoa, or they'll note the differences of opinion on quinoa. Rabbi Korobkin at the Beit Avraham Yosef Tenenbaum of Yosef of Toronto, he permits quinoa. So you go by what your guide is for those issues. Now, since we're not allowed to consume chametz, and chametz on Passover cannot be nullified. All right, if you have 1 grain of wheat in 60 grains of rice, for us Ashkenazim who won't eat it, it's not mevutal, it doesn't disappear. So the stringencies go to all aspects of our food preparation. The kitchen must be made kosher for Passover. Counters must be scrubbed. First of all, it's good for spring cleaning. Clean out everything, get rid of any chametz that's around. If you have stainless steel countertops, there are stainless steel stovetops, or you have a sink that's stainless steel, that's really good. Or the granite tabletops are also okay. You can wash them off, wait 24 hours, and then using steam, or you can use like we use the steam from our the press for our clothes, not an iron. You can use the steam from an iron too, to go over the surface to steam out any chametz that might be there after you've done a thorough cleaning. The ovens have to be cleaned. Now, if you have a self-cleaning oven, that's very easy. You clean it, run a cleaning cycle, and then I prefer to, after the cleaning cycle, to wait another 24 hours and run a shortened cleaning cycle to kosher the oven, the inside of the oven. The burners have to be turned on high, so that anything that comes in contact with food would be burned out. Some insist upon covering the top of the stove. If it's a stainless steel stove top, again, you can use the steaming or pouring hot boiling water over it, or just like you can in the sink. And if you have no other flatware, you can kosher the flatware like you do any time of kosher. You can't use the flatware for 24 hours. Get a big pot of boiling water, get it to a nice boil, drop the cutlery into it carefully, then take it out, rinse it off, and you've now koshered it for Pesach. Similarly, if you have pots that you cook in, cook pots, you boil food in it, you can kosher it the same way you would kosher any other kind of time. Fill it with hot water. If it's so big that you can't put it in another pot that's got boiling water, you take something hot, a brick or a small stone, whatever, get that hot, you can drop it in, the water boils over the top, and that koshers the pot. Refrigerators, we're straining, we have to clean them out. Again, it's good, at least once a year, you get rid of all the schmutz that gathers out in your refrigerators, all right? And clean up everything around it, get all the crumbs and everything that you can find out. other way. Now, dishes cannot be kosher for Passover. So you either have kosher for Passover plates and cups and bowls and all of that, or you use high quality paper or plastic for the holiday. Glass, in theory, can be koshered by soaking in water for 72 hours, changing the water every 24 hours. It's just as easy not to do, is to have separate glasses for Passover, or use throwaway paper plate cups or plastic cups for Passover. Hopefully recyclable cups of paper. Okay. If you use something to bake in, then you cannot kosher it for Passover. Okay. Baking, you cannot kosher it for Passover. There are differences of opinions about barbecues. If you have a gas barbecue, and you clean it off very well, make sure the top is clean too, where the grease would collect on the top of the barbecue. And that's the case of any kind of barbecue. Make sure that the grate is totally cleaned and koshered, and you kosher it like you would an oven, turning it up on high and leaving it going for at least about an hour to burn away any kind of chametz. Some won't use it on Pesach. There's also an issue because if you use charcoal, the charcoal briquettes can have chametz in them, which really shouldn't be a problem, but some are stringent in that case about not using charcoal briquettes on Pesach. Okay, I think I covered generally the food items and the cooking and koshering aspect of it. Okay, so now we're getting ready for Passover. Matter of fact, our ovens are already kosher for Passover. Fortunately, we have an extra oven down in the basement that becomes our pre-Pesach oven to use. Otherwise, we just start cooking everything as if it were Pesach. And if you've got everything prepared far enough in advance, you can do your cooking and everything. It makes it a lot easier rather than the last minute. So we've cleaned the house. We've gone up and down. It says in the Talmud, actually it's a Mishnah, the evening of the 14th, that's the night before Passover, once it becomes dark, you're supposed to do a search of your house to remove any chametz that you missed. Now, there are people who claim that they do a real searching for their chametz. I don't know. I see it mostly today as a pro forma act, and if you got kids, it's especially fun to do. Traditionally you need something. If it's dark, you gotta light up the room. So you'd have a candle or oil lamp. You can buy a kit that has a wax candle and a wooden spoon and a feather to sweep up any chametz. And what happens if you don't find any chametz? So you say a blessing. Before we started, we have a bracha, I'll be your chametz. But if I don't find any chametz, then I make a blessing in vain. So there's a tradition to put out pieces of bread so that you can find it. And again, if you got kids, that's all the more so to get them to look up and down for where the bread might be. You have to be careful on a couple of things. If you have a cat, for sure, you got to make sure it's not going to be taken by the cat. If you got dogs, all those dog lovers, make sure it's high enough that the dog can't get it. Because if the dog runs away with it, then you got to go through the house to see what the dog did. Did the dog eat it or did the dog leave it somewhere? So what we do, now it's just my wife and my oldest daughter's with us. We go through some rooms, we look around. But before that point, you should go through the house, go through drawers, go through everything, do a real good spring cleaning. and make sure there's nothing left lying around that is chametz. Okay, so by the time you do your bedikat chametz, you really probably shouldn't be able to find anything. That's why some people put out some pieces of bread to find it. Okay, so in the Haggadah, many Haggadot, at the beginning of the Haggadah, they have the ceremony that you do when you do the searching of the chametz. It has a paragraph that you're supposed to say. It's actually in Aramaic, but if you don't understand it, you really must say it in English. Because what you're saying is the following: any chametz that is in my possession, in my reshut, my possession, that I know about or don't know about, found, not found, is abandoned and is like the dust of the earth to me. Well, you can't make that statement unless you understand what you're saying. And then we have a similar thing that we say the next morning, usually after breakfast. And the morning before Pesach is divided into sections. You can eat chametz first thing in the morning, but by the end of the third hour of the morning, you have to suspend eating chametz. You can still make use of it if you want to feed your birds or your dog, what have you, or you want to take it and burn it, which is what is often done. And when you go to do that, you say that language of abandoning that chametz. Now, a lot of us have in today's world lots of items that are chametz, alcoholic beverages, bread, cereals, things like that are just too much to get rid of, especially this year when there's issues about costs and everything. And so I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but there came up with this idea by the Middle Ages of what we call mechirat chametz. Mechirat chametz is selling your chametz. If I've got a lot of chametz around and I don't want to own it on Passover, I can sell it. I sell it to somebody who's not Jewish and they can take it. End of story. If I want to get rid of it, just give it away. Give it to my next door neighbor that's not Jewish. I can give it away. It doesn't belong to me anymore. It's theirs. I don't have to worry about it. Well, that doesn't always work. Let's say you own a distillery like Seagram's. Right? Once upon a time, Seagram's was owned by a Jewish family, and at least at that time they observed the ritual. Well, that's a little expensive to get rid of all of that liquor. And so by the Middle Ages, the rabbis came up with what is called a mechirat chametz. What happens is usually each rabbi of the synagogue or of communities will become your agent to sell your chametz. And you empower the rabbi to sell any chametz that's in your possession. And you put it away and you say where it is. And you give the rabbi the right to rent to a non-Jew the place where that chametz may be found, as well as any utensils that may contain chametz to rent to them, or you're selling the chametz that's in the utensils. And then what the rabbi does, sometimes with a beit din, that's preferable. Sometimes a very large group of rabbis will get together. And then they will make arrangements with somebody who's not Jewish, often the caretaker of the synagogue. And they will say to this individual, I have this stack of powers of attorney. That's what they basically are. Shtar Shah is a power of attorney to sell all of the chametz in these people's homes. And you're allowed any time that you want to go into the home and take the chametz out if you so choose. Now, in order to make this a binding agreement, I'm going to sign the documents. I'm going to do what I call shtar I'm not sure. Sudar Kenyan, and means I will hold up a pen to you and you'll take the pen from my hands or a handkerchief or whatever it may be. You're going to give me a sum of money as a down payment. And I'll give you keys. Usually the rabbi gives keys to his home so that he can come into the house and get the chametz if he wants to. And we agree when Pesach is over, we will sit down again and ascertain how much money you still owe for that chametz that you put a down payment on. But that chametz is now yours. Now, of course, what is done is before this transpires, the rabbi says, tell you what, I'm going to lend you, say $50. Okay, so he lends him $50. So now they're going through this process and the rabbi says, okay, as a down payment for this chametz, I need $40 from you. So he gives the rabbi $40. The rabbi gave him $50 a minute ago. And since you're renting where the chametz is found, I need a payment for the rental for all of these properties. So we'll start with $10 and we'll figure it up later after Passover is over. So I need another $10 from you. So now it's the whole 50. Okay, and we will meet about an hour after Passover is over, concluded, to finish it all up. Okay. So now, since Passover this year begins on Friday night, a week later, Saturday night, the person will come to the rabbi and the rabbi says, okay, do you want to give me the rest of the money that you owe for all this chametz? And what the guy normally says something like this, you know what, I don't really want, I want to back out of the deal. Give me my money back. So the rabbi gives him back the $40 that he paid as a down payment. The $10 he doesn't get back. That's not a down payment. And now the sale is now null and void at post facto after it's, at this point in time. It was a kosher sale up until then. Indeed, the document that he signed said that even if according to civil law, this is not a legitimate business transaction, we both accept upon ourselves to live in accordance with this business transaction. And therefore, people who have sold their chametz about an hour after Pesach is over, they can go back and use that chametz because on Passover, it didn't belong to them. Anything that was on their property, well, if I own an apartment building and I have Jews and non-Jews that live in the apartment building, anybody can have whatever they want in their apartment. It's not my concern. Well, it might be my concern if they're cooking something like illegal, but if they want to have ham and eggs for breakfast, they can have ham and eggs for breakfast. It's not my responsibility to make sure my non-Jewish tenants don't have ham and eggs. So is it everybody knows what's going to happen. Everyone realizes that at the end of the day, the Gentile is not going to be owning all of that chametz after Pesach is over. So why do we do it? It's more than just saying it's illegal. See, if we simply said, we abandon it, it doesn't belong to us. Well, we know that's not kosher. It's not right. So we go through at least an act that on a pro forma basis is a legitimate act. And that pro forma action means that we understand I cannot own chametz on Pesach. Chametz is not mine. I'm told that there's one community where the rabbi every year, I don't know, I pick it out of a hat or something, tells the person who bought all the community's chametz, you can go to this person's house and take any chametz you want from there. Nobody knows which house it's going to be. So he can walk into your house on Pesach and go to your storeroom where you've got that $200 bottle of scotch. Why anybody would pay $200 for scotch, I have no idea. But you got a $200 bottle of scotch that you had opened, and he can pick it up and walk out the door with it, and you can't say a thing. That really, that's the extent of how real and true it is. There is a work written by a rabbi during the Holocaust. And in that book, he talks about all kinds of questions that they were asked during the Holocaust, and we'll talk about that another night. But one of the issues came up was the Jews would get their ration from the Nazis for the week, 2 weeks at one time. And they made sure they did it just before Pesach. And what are they supposed to do? That's their food. If they don't eat that chametz, they're going to die. And it deals with that issue, that very issue, basically saying, that we're having permission to eat this chametz, even though, we really shouldn't. Maybe next time I'll look at it. I've got it. I'll read it to you. There's also stories of the Holocaust when they had nothing, and so they had potato peels, and they used the potato peels to make matzah, so-called matzah, for their seders. All right. So we've sold all the chametz. Now there's another custom also that is followed. The day before Passover in the Bible, and during the times of the Second Temple, that was when the Passover sacrifice was brought. In Egypt, the first lamb was slaughtered and the blood was put over the doorposts for that night. And the firstborn of Egypt were slain, while the firstborn of Israel were not touched. And so there arose a custom that the day before Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, every firstborn son, in some circles even the firstborn daughters, would fast in recognition that their life was spared on Passover. However, there also developed a tradition to get out of having to do that fast, namely, somebody would complete a tractate of the Talmud, and they would have what they call a siyum. A siyum means a conclusion of the study of a tractate of the Talmud. And when you do that, you're always supposed to have something of a party, something of a celebration. So most synagogues have one or two or even several minyanim in which there will be a siyum, and firstborn go to that siyum, and then they can eat because they're celebrating the completion of a Talmudic tractate, and that's a special mitzvah, and they get out of fasting. Now, before the onset of Yom Tov, the house is cleaned, you get everything ready. You go, if you're going to get a haircut, you get it now because there are issues we'll talk about another time of the Omer period about haircuts. And you have everything set and ready for the Seder the first night. Because and when we go through the Haggadah, we'll see, it says you're supposed to do this ceremony on that night. So traditionally, we cannot begin the Passover Seder until it's clearly nightfall. Here's where I would be lenient for those who need leniency, and follow the Vilna Gaon, who says that's 15 minutes after sunset. Even that is relatively late this time of year. Becomes problems with families and their kids and people having family seders. If you have an issue with on starting times for the seder, talk to your rabbi. I've given advice to people in different circumstances on how they can best handle that situation. But ideally, let's see, what time is sunset this week? Okay. So sunset is around 7:50. This week, it'll be more like 8 o'clock next week. So my seders are not going to begin until about 9 o'clock. Okay. Certainly, again, ideally, it shouldn't start any earlier than about 8:15. But that's, you have to deal with your family situations, everything like that. And I leave that to you to talk to your rabbi. And the seders generally run a few hours. And as we'll see next week, it's a time to ask questions. It's a time to think about what it's all, what it means, what the whole issue is about freedom from bondage, how that all enters our lives today. I'll save that for discussion of the Haggadah next week. And so one of the main issues is that the afikomen has to be eaten before midnight. And midnight at this time of year, we mean about 1:30 in the morning. So at least your meal and eating the afikomen should take place before about 1:30. That's why I don't like daylight savings time. It's much better when we just have regular time and just leave it at that, but that's another problem for another day. The next morning, you have Yom Tov services. The services are like every Yom Tov. You have the basic service and special Torah readings. The first day of Pesach is the account of the first Passover, which makes sense. There's Hallel that's recited. The second night and the next day as well, the first 2 days of Passover are full holiday. The next few days, and the next 5 days, 4 days are Chol HaMoed. Ideally, one tries to avoid work if possible. One can't, one can go to work. What's interesting is on the first 2 days of Passover, we recite what is called the full Hallel, all of the passages that make up Hallel. On Rosh Chodesh, we have what they call Hallel B'dilug, or we shorten the Hallel. On Sukkot, all the way through Sukkot, we do the full Hallel. On Shavuot, we do the full Hallel. The exception to that is Pesach. On Pesach, the first 2 days, we do the full Hallel. But from then on, we only do what is called half Hallel, a Hallel B'dilug, skipping. Why? The reason for that is that the 7th day of Pesach is the day of the crossing of the sea. And Israel sang at the sea. And according to a famous midrash, the angels wanted to sing, and God hushed them. He says, "My children are dying, you do not sing." And so one of the important sages, rabbis, the late 19th, early 20th century, the Chavetz Chaim, says, since we don't say the full Hallel at the end of Pesach, out of sensitivity to the fact that the Egyptians were dying, so too we won't say the full Hallel during the intermediate days, so that the intermediate days don't seem to be more important than the last days of Pesach. And then Saturday night, when Pesach is over, we go back to our chametz, put everything away, and wait for 12 months to the next time we go through the craziness of getting ready for Pesach. All right. Anybody? On the intermediate Shabbat of Pesach, or this year since it's Shabbat Pesach, we do Shir Hashirim, the Song of Songs. We went over that a little bit earlier in the year, and it is one of the Megillot that are read in traditional synagogues on either the last days of Pesach or on the Shabbat between the intermediate days of Pesach. Okay. Any other question? Any questions, anybody? Okay, I will I would like you to try and make sure you have a Haggadah next week. I will try and make sure I have something on the screen for us to go by as we go through it. We will look at some of the Hebrew as well as the passages. And I think you should practice the 4 questions. Think about, I never can figure out if the dogs bark at each other and screens next to each other. One of my dogs, when there's a dog on the TV, barks. She sees the dog and she barks at the dog. And if they bark on the TV, oy vey, what noise we get. But fortunately, you guys don't have it on. You're silent, and so the dogs can't make too much noise. But that's okay. Us dog people understand. Okay, anything? Okay, have a good week, everybody. And next week, we will probably spend the entire 2 hours going over the Haggadah. So you got a little short this week, and next week maybe a little bit longer. Okay, good night, everybody.
Okay, I got a question, Rabbi
Yes.
Berman.
Sure.
If you wanted to go to a Seder, is there synagogues that like you could
There used to be.
pay for dinner?
There used to be that there were synagogues that are available. With
Mhm.
COVID, I think those went by the wayside, and I don't know. I would be happy to invite you to my home, but we're still a little leery
Mhm.
about having outside people coming in during this time of
Right.
year. I
Right.
mean, the under the pandemic.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Okay, so there's no synagogues that'd be doing that then.
I don't know. I haven't
Mhm.
seen anything, but you might check with Chabad. Chabad often has something.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say they've been doing a lot of stuff lately with like different dinners, different learning, and like extra kiddishes and stuff like that. So
Yeah, but the Seder's another thing altogether.
Midtown about Bathurst, or sorry, Vaughan and St. Clair.
Yeah.
Been doing quite a bit lately.
You have to look into it. I don't know. Give Chabad a call, and that's one possibility. I don't usually like to recommend people to Chabad, but that's one of the things that they're going to. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Good night.